Hello and welcome back to the Daily Express's Royal Roundup. It's been a while. We were inundated with royal news around a month ago now. So we had a little bit of a break, but we've come back and we have come back to political turmoil. And we're here to sort of go through all the topics with you. And of course, we are joined by Richard, the Daily Express's royal correspondent. Hello, Richard.
Hi, Pandora.
Welcome back. It's been a while, but there is never such thing as a slow news day, with Liz Truss resigning yesterday as PM, and the King, 6 weeks into his role, and he's having to deal with political chaos, quite frankly. So we did see one clip of the King, which I think we've got, which might have given an indicator. So let's take a look.
Just this one, sir.
Prime Minister, Your Majesty.
Your Majesty, lovely to see you again. Oh, it's a great pleasure.
Dear. Anyway, no, I never know how much they wanted.
Okay, so
Sorry, it just makes me giggle every time I see it.
It definitely made a few people laugh, including myself. So he obviously very much evidently said that, dear, oh dear. I think that's very reflective of the public opinion at the moment. But talk to me about this moment then, Richard. What exactly was going on?
Well, yeah, it is interesting because I think it became a social media sensation, and people felt, I think, that it sort of summed up the national mood. But actually, as far as I understand, what the reason he was doing that, I mean, obviously, normally the audiences that the monarch gives to the Prime Minister every week are completely confidential and are not filmed. I mean, very occasionally there's a little bit of filming for a documentary series or whatever, but you just hear pleasantries. And the whole idea of the weekly audience for the Prime Minister is it's an opportunity for the Prime Minister to offload. That clearly, it's a very high pressure job, and even people on your own side, whichever party's in power, you've got plenty of enemies who are trying to do you in. And so the idea is that you go and see the monarch and you can benefit from the monarch's years of experience and just talk through your troubles, whether they're personal or political or whatever, knowing that the monarch will keep all of that completely confidential. There's nobody else in the room. Obviously, the new king, he's baptism fire for him, but he has had years of experience. He's been the longest serving heir to the throne, and he's met plenty of politicians over the years, so he has got a lot of experience. And anyway, they agreed to film a little bit of it because it was the first weekly audience. And my understanding is that the reason he was saying "back again, dear oh dear," is that they just spent 2 hours together at a Privy Council meeting, just more or less in the next room, I think. So, so I think that was the reference. But of course, it was such great fun, and it was seized on by a lot of us. Well, I don't think I flagged it up to our paper, but I don't think we got it in the paper. But certainly, I know the Times did a story about it the next day.
Yeah, I mean, as you said, it went all over social media as well.
Yes.
And he has, he's been pictured lots on social media. Lots of people are talking about him. He comes across quite personable, but obviously he's come in at a time where politics is here, there, and everywhere. As a new king, he's got a very delicate balancing act, hasn't he, with public opinion? So how is he going to handle this crisis?
Well, he seems to have handled it really well so far, from what I can see. I mean, I think he. He's got a slightly different style to his late mother. He's quite sort of a bit more informal, I'd say. And he has been he's faced a baptism of fire, I think, because clearly there were 2 weeks of national mourning for the Queen, where he was front and centre, having to travel around the United Kingdom, accept condolences from politicians, but also many ordinary members of the public doing walkabouts or whatever. I think he handled it really well, from what I could see. And then supposedly get back to normal, and there's just suddenly this complete political turmoil. He's met, he's met Liz Truss quite a few times. There was a first audience September the 9th at Buckingham Palace, and then further meetings during the Accession Council and various other bits and pieces, various other events in the aftermath of the Queen's death. And now he's facing his second Prime Minister after only 6 weeks on the throne.
Yeah.
His mother had 15 Prime Ministers serving her, 15 UK Prime Ministers. Of course, the wags are already saying at this rate he'll soon be catching up with her.
Quite. And in terms of advice that, he would have received from his mother, I'm guessing she would have guided him a lot with all of these duties.
Yeah, and I think the constitutional duties of the monarch have been long established. Walter Bagehot in the 19th century set out the principles. Great constitutionalist, former editor of the Economist, if I remember rightly. And so the king is able to advise, caution, warn ministers. But in private, but essentially is there just to smooth things through. And but it has been busy for him because all of the appointments of new ministers, have to be rubber stamped by him, and the Privy Council meetings have to be held. So on Wednesday, for example, there was a Privy Council meeting where Jeremy Hunt, the new Chancellor, was given his seals of office. Various other, Penny Mordaunt as Lord President of the Council, had an audience with him. I mean, how important all of this really is, I have to say I'm not entirely clear. Could we get away without having it all? Possibly, but it's part of the paraphernalia of the state.
And obviously he has to stay sort of like unbiased, right? Because he could be dealing with one party one day and then a year later another party. How will the king be able to handle that when he's so, he's on such a first name basis with all these people, having, them literally sitting opposite him?
Yeah, I think it's second nature to him, really. I mean, he's had decades of dealing with cabinet ministers and opposition leaders, so I don't think that will be too onerous for him. I mean, it has been interesting. There was a story saying that Liz Truss had told him he couldn't go to, or shouldn't go to, the COP27 environmental meeting, and he's an ardent environmental campaigner for more than 50 years now, and has really led world opinion on climate change and other environmental issues, plastics, CFCs, whatever. And I think as Prince of Wales, he had hoped to go, but what we've been told is that it had never been confirmed, and certainly he accepted the advice. And I think in a lot of what he's done so far, he's shown that he did mean what he said in documentary. Was it a couple of years ago when he said he wasn't that stupid, and he realised that being king was a different job to being Prince of Wales, and that he would be more circumspect about what he said and did.
And obviously these are quite personal issues to him that he can't address as directly anymore. As king, can he have any influence on that? Obviously, the fact that he's got, literally just down the phone to his son, the now new Prince of Wales, would he be able to call him and sort of say, look, I can't do this, but can you? I mean, how far can he push the line?
I'd be speculating on that, but of course, Prince William shares a lot of the same concerns and views, so I think it would be second nature to him. So I suppose we might see. We've already seen Prince William speaking about the challenges we all face on climate change. He's going to Boston with Kate in December, late November, early December, to preside over the second Earthshot Prize Awards ceremony. I think he will speak out more and more on the environment, I think.
Okay, interesting. We took this to a poll to see what you thought on the Daily Express Twitter. So let's take a look at that if you can. Do you think King Charles is handling the political chaos well? Yes, 57%, no, 42%. So what I was going to ask you, Richard, obviously this poll is quite split, but because there's political chaos happening right now in the country, and obviously he is having meetings with politicians and people who don't quite understand or know the ins and outs of how these things work. Do you think it's reflecting perhaps slightly badly on him too?
I don't know. I'm surprised by that. I'm just not sure how he's handled it badly, unless people were thinking about that video of him saying "dear oh dear."
Yeah. And has he addressed that video or anything? Has there been any comms?
No, there's been no public addressing of that at all. It's not really the palace's style to do that. But I am confident that represents his account of how he said that, without saying too much more. I think political crises do present potential dangers for the monarch, whoever the monarch is. The Queen got dragged into the constitutional crisis over Brexit and the prorogation of Parliament, which was ultimately ruled unlawful. She'd approved that. And there was an issue that we identified when the Conservative government, pre the 2019 election, couldn't agree on how to go forward with Brexit.
Yeah.
And it appeared at the time that the then Prime Minister, didn't have the confidence of the majority of Parliament, but there hadn't been a vote of no confidence. And I was asking, well, can't the this was the then Queen, go and speak to other Privy Councillors, her senior advisors, and act as some sort of arbiter and try to resolve differences. And because a president might do something like that, but essentially, I was told that the Queen couldn't speak to, for example, the leader of the opposition without getting the permission of the then Prime Minister. And so the Prime Minister controls who she speaks to from the Privy Council. Anyway, that's done a bit of a rabbit hole on that one.
I know, but lots of A to Z, which goes on, which a huge majority of the general public, including myself, I don't know, things like that. So it's fascinating. Okay, well, we heard what you guys thought about that on the poll, which was quite intriguing. But we're going to move on now onto the Netflix's new series of The Crown. The Crown has been hugely popular, and it is a dramatisation of events which have happened within the royal family, which go back many years, and there has been continuing series of this due to how successful it is. It has some of the best actors and actresses in it, and it pulls in thousands and thousands and thousands of viewers. Well, there's a new series. We can show a tiny clip of it without audio, so if we can, let's have a look at that now. Okay, so that gives a tiny indicator, and that is due to copyright rules with Netflix. As you can imagine, when there's so much at stake here, they're very picky about what they give us, but they gave us that. And this series has been spoken about a lot, hasn't it, Richard? And it's kind of, lots of speculation about it, of reaction from the royal family, what it could involve. Richard, so far with all of these series of The Crown, how had the royal family handled it?
Well, they've mainly ignored it, and I was always led to believe that they didn't watch it. But I think certainly Harry has suggested he's seen a few episodes, if I remember rightly, and I'm not sure if the new Queen Consort Camilla has maybe perhaps hinted that she's seen a few. I've also seen it suggested that the Queen used to watch episodes. At the time, I was told not. But I think, I think the thing about it is, I suppose it's a bit like any Hollywood movie. It's very rare that anything on TV or on the big screen on the movies is completely true to history. And any dramatization, they're going to fill in the gaps. And I think anybody who believes that the Crown is telling the true story of the British royal family is nuts, basically, because there's it's just it's fictionalized. It's a bit like historical fiction. Hilary Mantel's works about the reign of Henry VIII. Filling in the gaps, making characters say and do things that they may well not have done.
So where do they base all of this, all of the scripture and all of the events? Where do they base this all from then?
Well, I think it's just invented. I think they've got some fantastic people working for them. Robert Lacey, who is a very well-respected royal biographer and historian, has been advising them, and it's loosely based on the facts, but
is the
very, very loosely, yes, yeah. And of course, there's been this debate about whether there should be a disclaimer on. My understanding is that there's always been a disclaimer that says this is fictionalized, but it's not, it's not particularly prominent. And
no, it's not. And I think Netflix, they've had a lot of push for it, but from what I've heard, they're not going to make it any bigger. They're not going to, do a release a statement on it any further. Is what I've heard.
Yeah, of course, as it gets nearer and nearer to the present time, it gets more sensitive for the royal family, and so because now when you're dealing with,
of course,
Charles and Diana's breakup, etc., then that impinges on the modern monarchy more. It's great for us in the media because you've got these glamorous actors, glamorous royals, and I used to rail against writing stories about it because certainly in the early days, hardly anybody in the UK watched Netflix, but now it's very widely seen. So I can't really argue against it.
Will the comms team of the palace and the different households will have to watch it in case there is something extremely slanderous or something depicted in it?
I don't think so. I think if they're sensible, they'll follow the line that they've taken in the past, which is whilst they will certainly take up with us in the media if there are things we write that are particularly damaging. There's stuff every week that they just let go because they'd never do anything else otherwise. But I think they've often taken the view that they shouldn't interfere with artistic freedom. So like sometimes if there's a story written about a row over an insulting work of art or a play that's about to be put on in the West End, they just say, well, it's not our job to interfere with artistic freedom. So I think if it's sensible, they'll probably carry on doing the same over this.
Now, am I right in thinking they had to release a statement for the last series, or they had to say something back because so many people were up in arms over it because it did feature Diana?
I do remember the Queen's press secretary saying something.
There was something.
Yes, the then press secretary saying that, communication secretary, and sorry, I'm a bit hazy on what he actually said now.
No, I'm the same, but there was something basically addressing what you've already said.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, fine. Okay, then. So obviously there might be a couple of members of the royal family watching it. Do you think they'll be worried of any backlash? Obviously, the king is he's a new king, 6 weeks in, probably 8 weeks in by the time this comes out, roughly. And he is one of the main protagonists in it because it follows the whole storyline of the aftermath of Diana. Do you think he'll be worried at all with the massive amount of public which will be watching it, or unbothered?
I imagine he and his advisors will regard it as unhelpful because it brings back all of the stories about the affair and about Charles and Diana's briefing against each other and all of that. So I'm sure they'd rather it wasn't happening, but what can they do?
Yeah. Exactly. Well, I, for one, actually will be watching it. I'm quite excited by this series. Purely, not obviously, I know it's not the truth of everything that's happened, but it does look very, very good, and it does have some fantastic actresses and actors in it, and the locations from that tiny snippet we just saw as well. It's obviously had so much money thrown at it that it can look amazing. Richard, will you be watching it?
Well, I didn't used to have. We do have Netflix now, so I've never watched it before. Never watched a single episode.
So you'll watch, maybe perhaps watch one of the first episodes of the first series, and then you'll get hooked. And then by the time we go on next week, you'll be like, I can't wait for the new series to come out. It's very good. Yeah,
I did a US radio interview a couple of years ago, and they didn't check with me before, what I was going to say or what my views were really, and but I'd already written something about it, and I think that's why they asked me to go on. And in fact, the New York Times quoted me, but I can completely stump the guy because I said I just haven't watched it. So.
Well, that's the thing, because people who aren't part of British society and perhaps in America, this is all they know of the royal family, and this obviously goes worldwide. Obviously, they've now got Harry and Meghan over there too. But yes,
one of the things that worries me, actually, it may sound a bit silly, but like when you read a book and then you see a TV series or a film afterwards, and then your view of what of the book is coloured by the TV version or the film version. And I did wonder whether I worried about whether it would colour my view of what actually happened going back 50 years, 40 years.
Yeah, no, I do understand that. No, and then it does kind of, I do get what you mean, slightly colours your view and distorts it. And also for me, I wasn't alive for some of these events, or I was very, very young. So that's also probably slightly distorted my view too. But yes, interesting. We did a couple of polls on this, see what you guys thought of The Crown. Will you be watching Netflix's new series of The Crown? This is in the Daily Express audience. No, 62%. Yes, 37%, but that's still quite a big chunk with 37%. That was interesting. And then we did another poll on this, I think, as well, on The Crown. Do you think the Netflix series The Crown is a good reflection on what life might be like within the royal family? No, 67%. So I hope you're 76%. So I hope you're pleased about that, Richard.
I think most sensible people realise it's fiction.
Yeah, exactly. Hopefully that will be reflective of what other people think too. But there we are. Okay, so let us know what you think of The Crown when it comes out. I'm sure this won't be the last conversation we'll have on it. So it'll be very interesting to see, and whether the royal family do make any other comments on it. But one of the ladies within The Crown, well, should I say one of the ladies, an actress is playing one of the ladies, not the Queen Consort herself, but a few years ago. We're going to be talking about the Queen Consort now. She is settling into her new role. She was at Ascot. I think she was at Chelsea Westminster Hospital. She's been very, very busy, and despite the fact that she had her new role before this, she was also busy with Charles, but she's doing lots of solo visits, isn't she, Richard?
Yeah, she's done a few. Yes, yeah, and it was interesting. She was at Ascot because it coincided with a story in one of the Sunday papers saying that the the king was going to sell 12 of his late mother's horses, race horses, which is a big chunk of how many he owns. And from what I can see, that seems to be right. They're up for auction, I think, at Tattersall's. And there's also been speculation about the Royal Stud at Sandringham and whether that will continue or whether it will effectively become a museum. I mean, I wasn't around the day after when our paper checked it out and ran a story, but I mean, from what I can see, certainly the number of horses in the royal operation looks likely to be reduced. And I think horse racing was the Queen's passion, and rather like her mother, she spent a lot of money on it. I think the horse racing was losing about £1 million a year.
Oh gosh, okay.
So I think there's a bit of cost cutting going on, and I don't think the royal family are going to stop supporting horse racing. I think Queen Camilla will be the effective person representing the sport in the royal family, and I think that she and the king will continue to keep horses, but it doesn't sound as if it's going to be as big an operation.
And so that was a huge chunk that went up for sale. So how many horses? Do you have any idea how many horses they have?
I think that roughly corresponds to about a quarter of them, something like that, if I remember.
Okay, fine. So they've still got a fairly big chunk. And for somebody who doesn't know a lot about horses, which I don't, how much will these horses fetch up, at auction? Because obviously the late Queen's horse, I can imagine, won't be cheap.
You're asking the wrong person. I'm sorry, I don't. We need to get a horse race. Jason, the horse racing editor.
But you said also that the Queen Consort's at Ascot, and we've seen her there before. But obviously Zara as well.
Yes.
She's not so much of a forward-facing senior royal, but she obviously is very, very keen on horse racing, obviously. But yes, and how are they juggling their relationship, Queen Consort and the King? We saw them, about a month ago now, I think, when the King had a day of reflection and she went to her separate household as well.
Yeah.
Are they
Raynell in Wiltshire, which is she's retained as a home, where she sees her grandchildren and just chills out a bit. My understanding's always been that while she does spend time at Highgrove with him, and of course the residences, which is a whole other story, the huge number of residences that they've got. She likes to have that as a bolt hole, and they all looked. I mean, we didn't get a chance to discuss all of that period.
Morning,
because I was off afterwards, and then you were off. But I mean, they all looked completely exhausted. I mean, it was a real privilege to be at some of the events, particularly at the obviously at the state funeral, but also at the ceremony where the royal family brought the Queen's coffin into Westminster Hall. And you could see the strain on their faces. But I think that was a time that. Sorry, I'm digressing here. But I think that was a time when the royal family and indeed the BBC broadcasting many of the events, the state funeral, etc., really showed the United Kingdom off in its best light, really.
Yeah, and moving forward from that point is, are they staying together as a team, or are they more now seen solo? Because that would be quite different for them, because they do seem to lean on each other for support.
I think there's been a real mixture. The King's been up in Scotland quite a lot, which has been quite quite noticeable, and I think that is partly because he was following the pattern that his mother would have followed. She would have been at Balmoral until early to mid October, and indeed he and the Queen Consort would normally spend a fair amount of time up in Scotland at Birkhall this time of year. But I mean, I got terrible flack on Twitter for just mentioning it, just observing really that the King in particular was clocking up an awful lot of miles, an awful lot of gas guzzling, and his carbon footprint. It was just an observation, but I think it was down to the fact that he was really combining two different things, and she was as well, doing what they would normally have, well, three things in a way, doing what they would normally have done. So they had a few engagements planned, mainly up in Scotland, following the Queen's pattern of where she would expect to be, and then having to come back down to London to do the job of king, to come and meet visiting heads of state or preside over the Privy Council. So yeah, there seems to have been quite a lot of going backwards and forwards from Scotland.
Yeah, there does, but he'll be aware of that.
Yeah, I mean, it just sort of goes with the territory. It's a bit unfortunate when you've been an environmental campaigner, but this is what happens.
Yeah. Okay, fine. Well, we're going to move on from Queen Consort, I think, and we're going to talk about a nice, light-hearted topic at the end. Fergie has been looking after the Queen's corgis, Muick and Fergus, and she released a sweet picture of them. So there we are. But that obviously that is a very sweet picture, but it made me think, Richard, now that the Queen has passed, and obviously, Andrew and her, spend a lot of time together, but she was very, very close with the Queen. How will have her relationship has shifted due to the Queen's passing with the royal family?
Well, it's a good question because, yes, the Queen was very much a sort of mediator and kept ties with Fergie, I think on the grounds that she was the mother of her granddaughters, and Beatrice and Eugenia were very close to the Queen. I think it was Prince Philip who had the biggest problem with Sarah, Duchess of York, and he really didn't like to be in the same room as her. I think the new king is. He's, I've seen him kissing her on both cheeks or whatever before. I think as ever, there's always a difference between how they get on as a family and what they do in public. In the official work. So clearly, she and Andrew are still living at opposite ends of Royal Lodge, and are still very good friends. And they've taken on she's taken on the role of looking after the two remaining corgis, but I don't think there's any sort of way back for Andrew and Fergie. So I don't anticipate.
No. So do you think, obviously she does a lot of, she does all the things on social media these days, and she's an advocate for, or a patron here and an advocate for there, but there'll be no, for her, there'll be no kind of step back into the spotlight either, and more so now that the Queen has passed?
No, I mean, I just don't think she was ever coming back, really.
No.
She wrote the copybook so many times.
Do you think that the King is going to get corgis, or do you think that's the end of the corgis?
I suspect that. I mean, it's a good question, but I suspect that's the end of the royal corgi.
No, that's very sad.
I mean, they've got Jack Russells, haven't they? Queen Camilla's got a couple of Jack Russells. So yeah, never suspected that he was that keen on corgis.
No, okay, fine. All right. Well, that was a nice light topic to end things, Richard. Thank you so much for coming on today. It's been good fun. It's been a month, but we're back. And you can catch all of the Royal Roundup series over on our playlist on Facebook, over on our Instagrams. You can catch Richard on Twitter as well at Royal Reporter. Very easy to find. And you can see what he's doing day to day. He has some great tweets and get a bit of an insight into what happens the day to day of the royal family. And then that's when we do the Royal Roundup with the best bits of this week. But hopefully we'll be back at the same time next week, to be confirmed with Richard, dependent on schedules. But thank you so much, Richard, and thank you everybody for tuning in, and we'll be back next week.
Thanks.